Joining us on this because he's got a great book out. He broke the rape story in Loudoun County schools. From Daily Wire, investigative reporter Luke Rosiak. His new book, Race to the Bottom, Uncovering the Secret Forces Destroying American Public Education. It is out this week. You're going to be shocked when you read it because it's not just one school district, not two, not three. Luke's going to tell us how many school districts he's been covering. And he talks about it in his book. Luke, first off, congratulations, Luke, on the book. Thanks for joining us. How many school districts are you touching on in this book?
The book basically does what I did for Loudoun for 61 different school districts.
61.
We've got 13,000 of them in the country, so it also kind of helps parents connect it to theirs. If they're not one of the 61, we follow the consultants, and that hits on almost all the 13,000 once you bring in these consultants who go from town to town spreading these poisons.
This is wild, and this has been, and ultimately, and I think you and I have talked about this, and I haven't read your book yet, but I'm going to. I already bought my own copy. Really, a lot of parents, it's not because I think parents had misplaced trust. I don't think that parents abdicated a duty. I think that they just had misplaced trust in these professionals that said that they cared about kids. And then when everybody was at home during lockdown, is that really, from all of your reporting on this, is that really when you see this kicking off, is during lockdown when parents saw what their kids were learning right there in their kitchen?
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it, is we trusted them and they took advantage of our trust. I think one of the things I was surprised at spending 2 years researching this book is the problems really began a lot longer. It's just that we woke up to them as parents last year or so. And what we saw with coronavirus and with this latest CRT thing are really symptoms of really a multi-decade long pattern of deception and self-enrichment by various special interest groups that have come to sort of captivate these schools.
We have talking with Luke Rosiak, whose new book, Race to the Bottom. He looks at all of these. He looks at American public education, and that's the subtitle, Uncovering the Secret Forces Destroying American Public Education. I kind of wonder, in looking at, there's been a lot of discussion about what the pandemic did to kids, but I wonder what kind of education, what kind of, this reordering of academics and focusing on behavioral conditioning as opposed to, because the stuff that I've read that you've reported on, whether it's CRT or the covering up of sexual assaults and rapes in schools against minor children, I would have so much anxiety if I were a kid in a school district today. How is this affecting kids and their learning and overall their academic life?
Well, these people are willing to inflict social, emotional, physical, and even sexual abuse on children to advance their agenda. And we saw it with the school closures. I mean, that was such a vicious, such a selfish thing to do on the part of these teachers. You had, we all were going shopping, we're going to stores, we're going everywhere, and people are doing their job, $15 an hour working at the checkout counter at Target. People are showing up. But these teachers were the only ones that refused to go to work, and they did not care that kids were becoming suicidal, kids were becoming illiterate. There were 3 million kids, mostly in the inner cities, who just dropped off the grid. We don't know what happened to them because they weren't showing up to school. There was no school. They weren't going to log on to this remote learning. And so there's this cutthroat nature that they will do anything to get their way, and they don't care who it harms.
This really is a battle between the public education hierarchy and parents, because I think there are a lot of good teachers out there and some not good teachers out there. Where did this idea that parents lose authority over their children once they cross that threshold into the school building, where did this idea come from? When did this start becoming a thing that Democrat elected leaders who are governors and mayors would repeat this? When did that happen?
I think it has to do with the fact that we spend $17,000 per year per kid on education, and yet these administrators and teachers, the best they've managed to do for all that money is a 36% literacy rate and 24% proficiency in math.
That's insane.
It is the scam of the century. Any company would be they would have lost our business. They would have been, reviled by the general public. And we just have no choice but to send our kids there. And to kind of prevent this general revolt by parents, it's really important that they keep parents at arm's length.
Yeah.
And so they've done that for a long time. The PTA is a total union front, teachers union front. They've managed to keep parents out for the longest time. And now I think they're just going into this visceral reaction of, these are our kids, just stop, just stay away. With the Florida thing, I don't think anyone can actually defend teaching kindergartners about gay sex. I think it's really just a symbolic gesture of like, they are our kids. It doesn't matter what parents think. And we're just going to kind of use this as an example to just ram that notion down your throat.
Yeah. We're talking with Luke Rosiak. It mystifies me as why parents who maybe disagree with the law, why can't they just go, you know what? All right, maybe we should be teaching our children about this non-academic stuff in our home and leave schools, this nonpartisan academic public schools, academic institutions. All the people who oppose this bill, nobody's had that idea.
Yeah, no, and they lie about it, obviously, saying don't say gay. I mean, and that's one of the main things here is the schools lie. They deceive parents on a routine basis, and they have for decades. They say the bill says gay and it don't say gay. They say schools are underfunded. Funding has doubled for schools in the last 20 years. It's quadrupled in the last 40
but
years.
Not test schools.
This is... Yeah, exactly. And so they were just willing to lie. They're always frantically looking for excuses to explain those test scores. And if they can deflect to racial issues, if they can deflect to funding issues. But at the end of the day, we've got to keep these school boards focused on those 3 R's. That's the only reason that we pay them. That's the only reason kids are in school. And what you'll find is that SEL, CSRE, all these acronyms that they're always trying to throw around and confuse parents. The book helps you understand all those. You can go to these school board meetings and not get intimidated, not get gaslit. But the long and short of it is it's all subjective crap.
Yeah.
They want to move it away from test scores that you can measure and you can see that they're totally horrible at their jobs, to this weird stuff like SEL and we've done an assessment on your kid and here's what we think about his blah, blah, blah. It's all fake. I mean, that's all it is this is like Enron, the energy company doing those numbers scams.
Yes.
That's what these people do. They just move numbers around to trick you.
That's a really good point. Talking with Luke Rosiak, who looks at all of this stuff, Race to the Bottom, Uncovering the Secret Forces Destroying American Public Education, his new book, published this week. Because the SEL and CRT, now correct me if I'm wrong on this, because we're getting ready to have another big school board battle over 2 seats coming up next election here. And we just had a hell of a time last week. And then now DOJ sending their education division in to try to bully our school district because we rejected CRT. So now we have the Department of Justice that is coming in and trying to throw its weight around. And they're working with the CRT supporters to it's Carroll ISD, to go after parents. They sent mailers, and Luke, and I know you and I talked about this. The people who supported CRT named parents who opposed it, and a lot of them were minority parents. Named parents and shamed them and smeared them, said lies about them, and sent them in a mailer to everybody's house in the area. It is. I can see why so many parents are afraid to speak out. Like you were saying, they use this language and this, this numbers gaming to try to scare parents at school board meetings. Because I think SEL is the behavioral conditioning and how you learn something, and CRT is the revisionist history that you learn. To me, that seems like the best way to get it.
Yeah, no, and you guys have been doing amazing work in Texas. I think this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. It's special interest versus children. And they have it down to a science, how to puppeteer these different, where you've got, the DOJ working with this tiny faction. They did something very similar in New York City. And they are, basically kids get harmed by the things they do all the time, including, so going back to the Obama years, they talk about school to prison pipeline, and they want to get these statistics looking good of discipline because too many black kids are suspended. So like in Los Angeles, during a couple of years, the suspensions go down from 75,000 to only 5,000. So either the schools have gotten way safer in a couple of years and all the problems with kids acting out and beating each other up have been fixed, or they just started lying and just letting kids get beat up and just not doing anything about it.
That's what they did in Parkland with Robert Runcie, because he used that school to that exact program you were talking about. He just stopped counting the crimes and if you don't count them, then they don't exist, right? Then you can
That's
reduce
exactly
it.
right. And that's what CRT is. It says tests are racist, objectivity isn't real, wanting the right answer is a function of white culture. Well, so when you've got this pathetic 11% history proficiency and 24% math proficiency, suddenly guess what? It doesn't matter. I'm not a horrible teacher who's just swindling taxpayer dollars and totally letting kids down for decades, because that 24% math proficiency doesn't matter because tests are racist.
Yeah.
And so it's not about helping kids. When you hide a problem gets worse. And they're letting down these kids. It's like if you go to the doctor with a fever and the doctor checks your temperature with a thermometer and then just decides to snap the thermometer in half and say, problem solved, you're cured. Not measuring something doesn't make the problem go away.
That's a great point. Last question for you, Luke Rosiak. So it seems like the future of this is school choice, but is that attainable? Because it is such a bipartisan issue, which I think is a threat to all these people trying to push this stuff on our kids in schools. I mean, it feels like it has a chance to be really successful, but I mean, you've been all around the country looking at this. What is your take?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, this transcends traditional partisan alliances. We've seen here in Virginia, the traditional Democrats move over to the Republican side. I was at a school board meeting last night where a bunch of Asian parents were chanting "racist, racist" at the Fairfax County School Board because they got rid of the magnet school admissions test because there was too many Asians. And they actually gave copies of my book, Race to the Bottom, to the school board members, and they fled the school board meeting rather than take the books because they can't stand being called Asian or racist by these Asians. So we're seeing shifting alliances here, and I think that when you look at school choice on these polls, it has strong majorities from both parties. So if you could put it to a ballot referendum rather than counting on lawmakers to do it, I think if you could get it right to the voters, it could pass.
That's a great point. Get it to the voters as opposed to letting it languish in the hands of lawmakers. That's a way to do it. The book is Race to the Bottom, Uncovering the Secret Forces Destroying American Public Education. If you know of kids, you need to have this book. Regardless if you pay taxes in a school district, you need to have this book. Luke Rosiak, you always do such great work. Congrats on this book, and can't wait to see what you break next. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dana.